All right. Well, it's 2 o'clock right now. Um, Great. Hi, Cheryl. And Dr. Shakti, if you want to try sharing your screen, I think you're able to right now, if you're back already. Oh, great. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and say, Dr. Shakti, thank you for joining today. Dr. Sakthi Subburayalu is a research assistant professor of soil science and agronomy in the Research and Development Program in the College of Science and Engineering at Central State University. He has already been at work collecting soil samples on the properties with conservation practices that received cost share assistance through the Jacoby Partnership to date. And so today we're lucky to have him join us to discuss his efforts monitoring these conservation practices, not only in our partnership program, but across the state and nation. So thank you, Dr. Shakti.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you all about the work that we're doing at Central State University. You know, I was debating between whether I should talk about the conservation practices themselves. You know, I had a conversation with Cheryl about this, or should I only focus on soil and water quality monitoring work that we're doing at Central State University. I chose the latter in the interest of time, you know, just focus on the work that we're doing. And I kind of explain how Central State is fitting into the RCCP, you know, project as a whole, and what we're trying to achieve in the region, and like you said, across the state, and also nationally. So, okay, let me see. Yes. Both Megan and Cheryl talked about different practices that could be funded under EQUIP. And some of you had asked this question, you know, what are the practices, you know, what are some of the practices that, you know, that stand a good chance of getting funded? I mean, this is not an answer to that question, but I thought, you know, Cheryl and I have been, you know, going back and forth via email, and I was asking her about the data at the state level for the different programs and the funding under each of the programs through NRCS over the years. What you're looking at there is a plot of the funding under different programs, total obligations by program fund in Ohio in thousands of dollars over the past couple of decades. So let me move my screen here. Let's close this, minimize that. As you can see there, you know, the top one that you're seeing here, right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor here on the screen, but this is our EQUIP funding, right? In 35,000 and thousands of dollars, so it's about 35 millions, close to 35 million right now in the 2019s and 2020. That should give us an idea of the importance of this program across the state. You know, when we have other programs, conservation stewardship program, you know, that's this line here. And, you know, conservation reserve program and ASAP and CSP and CTAs. But EQUIP, you know, tops out all. And Cheryl, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I just summarized the data that, you know, from the website that you had shared. Toward the end, I think, and if you have some time, you can comment on some of the graphs that I've made. But this gives us an idea of the importance of EQUIP funding that we have available for producers in the region. And this is taxpayer dollars. And I think, you know, this is my, you know, I would like to strongly encourage people and producers to tap into these resources that we have. This is how much is being spent for conservation in our region. Okay. So yeah, that's just showing the EQUIP dollars that we have, right? And in addition to the support that we receive in the form of EQUIP dollars and other conservation program funds through NRCS, you know, we are also well aware of the support that we're receiving for conservation related to water quality in the form of H2O Ohio funds. Like many of us, you know, many of you might already know, the focus is primarily on the Northwestern Ohio, you know, the 14 county region right now. But eventually the goal is to expand these funding, you know, sources move into the southwestern Ohio and all the watersheds down south that drains into Ohio River. Right now we're focused mainly on the northwestern Ohio, and as you can see here, this is just a fact sheet from Ohio Department of Agriculture announcing about 1.2 million acres in voluntary nutrient management plan. Nutrient management plan, which is the NRCS practice code 590, is also supported through this program. I think through H2O Ohio, and it's also an EQIP eligible program, right? So 1.2 million acres in northwestern Ohio in the 14-county region. So my work at Central State has been, take some of the funding sources that we have available through RCPP and EQIP and other fund and promote conservation in our region, in Great Miami, Little Miami River watersheds. Let me tell you why why we're focused on that at Central State University shortly. But this is the idea, this is the thing, we have a lot of work happening in northwestern Ohio, but I think I would love to see similar work, conservation work happening in southwestern Ohio as well. And here's a table that gives you an idea of the nutrient fluxes. Like Krista pointed out, one of the goals for all of these conservation practices is really environmental quality, water quality. But by the same token, I want to also say that it's not just about environmental quality. When we think about all these conservation practices, we're also improving the productivity and sustainability of, in our crop production. So as you can see from this highlighted area here, upper Great Miami and lower Great Miami watershed, we still have a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus fluxes coming through, and then Little Miami, same case here, we have a lot of nitrogen issues. Lower Great Miami has both nitrogen and phosphorus issues. Southwestern Ohio, the bigger problem is nitrogen. So it is not only important to keep this nitrogen and phosphorus away from our surface waters, but also keep them in the field for crop production. And we have to remember that if we are losing nitrogen and phosphorus, and if we are the nitrogen phosphorus is entering into our surface streams, it's not only polluting the waters, but also we're losing money from the fields when these nitrogen fertilizer is leaving the field. When farmers supply the nitrogen fertilizer and it leaves the field, actually we're losing money there. What are some of the top conservation practices in Ohio? This is another data set I was able to pull out from the website, that Cheryl provided me, So you can see the top two, I'm going to focus on the top two. There are several, like Megan and Cheryl both pointed out, there are several of them, but these are the top ones, funding-wise and acreage-wise, in Ohio. And as you can see that the top one here is conservation crop rotation. But conservation crop rotation over the years has been on the decline since the 2014. So you can see there's a slight decline. But the one right next underneath that is our cover crop. You can see the cover crop acreage is growing. And then we have nutrient management, which is another key practice that's gaining momentum. This is again in the state level. My assumption is a lot of this is happening in northwestern Ohio. We still have to do a lot of work in southwestern Ohio in our watersheds, in Great Miami and Little Miami watersheds. So how can Central State University partner with you on this, right? So Fred, I think he's part of this meeting here. We have collected soil samples from his field, and what we have done is we have collected grid soil samples, and not just Fred's field, and we have Jim Clem's field. We have sampled from there. As you can see in this image, this is implementation of grass waterway on his farm. So what we did at Central State, I have a team of people working under me. We would go out and collect a grid soil sample from that site. The goal is to monitor, the condition of soil before and after the implementation of practices on a long-term basis. I'm a researcher. My position at Central State University is a research faculty, so I'm interested in soil health and water quality, the impacts of agricultural management practices on soil health and water quality. So when we go out and collect soil samples from this from the participating farms. We're maintaining the data, but also like, summarizing information and producing reports on how well these practices are performing in our region. As you may all know, not every soil type is going to be very similar. And there's a lot of variability down south, southwestern Ohio, particularly, northwestern Ohio. It's a clay pan. It's impacted by glaciers, but southwestern Ohio, as you move down further south, it's not impacted by glaciers at all. So there's so much variability down in the southwestern Ohio. So our goal is to see how these practices are performing in the different landscapes and how the variability in the landscape is impacting these conservation practices. Right now, I have about 10 farms where we have sampled. We have collected around, just last summer, we have collected around 1,000 samples, 1,000 plus samples, and waiting to be analyzed in the lab. In my next picture, I can show you, we have a lab at Central State University. It's called the Agricultural Natural Resource Information and Management Lab, and RIM Lab in short. We have the capacity to quantify the soil samples and organic matter in soils, macro and micronutrients, nutrients in water. We have a flow injection analyzer where we can, and it's a high throughput instrument. We can analyze nutrients in the water that is coming off the edge of farmers' fields or in stream using that instrument. So we can quantify that. We can also quantify macro and micronutrients using some advanced instruments. So we have an ICP-MS, and I'm getting an ICP-OES to analyze macro and micronutrients in soils. We also have a carbon nitrogen analyzer on the right-hand side corner. You can see that instrument there, where we use that instrument to quantify carbon and nitrogen in our soils. And one of the key variables when it comes to soil quality or soil health is carbon and organic matter sequestration. So that's something that we monitor. And we also have set up to do all kinds of soil physical properties, including aggregate stability, infiltration. And then, as you can see here, we also have other instruments in the lab that are much more advanced, which are spectral radiometers. Our goal is to identify methods that can rapidly analyze the soil properties. When we collect samples, when we want to analyze all these soil properties, including organic matter and other soil physical and chemical properties, we want to develop a method that can quickly, identify those properties in soil. So this is an FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, and then we also have a plate reader. So this lab is, I'm the director of this lab, and I'm growing this lab. The goal is to really partner with the stakeholders in the region and the producers in the region and see how we can holistically address the problem of environmental quality, water quality and soil health. And then, of course, at the bottom, you can also see that we have access to drones. That's another way that we can partner with the producers in the region. I'm planning for some flights this summer. We have hyperspectral sensors, and we have multispectral and thermal sensors. We can take our drones and fly over the farm fields that are partnering with Tecumseh Land Trust and Jacoby in the Jacoby Creek Partnership. We'll be flying some fields there and collecting drone-based imagery. We'll try and relate drone-based imagery to the soil properties and soil health and whatnot. So that's another way that we're thinking about partnering with the stakeholders in the region. Another work that I want to highlight that Central State has been part of, and we're continuing to grow in that, is in the area of edge of field monitoring. What you're seeing here in this image, is an edge of field ISCO sampler. So this, I don't know how many of you have seen this in works. Actually, this auto sampler can collect automated water samples throughout the growing season, throughout the year, in fact, actually. So this is a programmable auto sampler. We can tap into any tile drainage, or if it is a surface runoff, we can set this instrument to receive surface runoff. And what it does is actually it quantifies the flow rate coming off edge of farmers' fields, and it also takes samples on a regular basis. We can program it every 6 hours or every 12 hours, however we want to. And if we have a rainfall event, we can program this remotely from our offices and increase the intensity of data collection, water sample collection. So every week or two, my field technician would go out and he would sample gather those samples, bring it to the lab that I showed, ANDRIM lab, and then we analyze those samples for the nutrients, particularly nitrates and phosphorus. So we partner with, this is our cooperator in Montgomery County. So we partner with him, and he is well aware of what we're doing in this farm, and we bring to the lab and analyze for nutrient, for nitrogen and phosphorus. That was about edge of field monitoring. But we're also doing some InStream monitoring. As you can see, Krista alluded to the fact that we're working with Xylem. This is a SON, like it's a Xylem product, it's a YSI product. This SON actually collects data on dissolved oxygen thermal conductivity. And when we are going out there to download the data from the SON, this SON is deployed along the Little Miami River. We have 6 locations that we're monitoring along the Little Miami River. So these SONs, they collect data every 15 minutes. And when we go out every week to download the data, we also do some grab sampling, bring some bottles with us, and we collect water samples, bring it to the lab and analyze for nitrates and phosphates in the Little Miami River. We're also doing some InStream monitoring in the Beaver Creek watershed. We have identified 6 wetlands along that watershed, along that creek, and where we are monitoring water, the quality of water at the entry and exit points of these wetlands. We have 6 wetlands. We're monitoring all of that. Just to show you that it's not just the edge of field monitoring that we're doing. We're also doing some InStream monitoring, and our lab is set up to quantify water quality benefits at the farm scale and also at the regional scale. These are point sampling, I can also talk a little bit about regional scale work that we're doing. We just have recently we formed a partnership with stakeholders in the Cesar Creek area, Cesar Creek watershed. We have multiple partners. The key partners there are, it's led by Salt and Water Conservation District, Warren County Salt and Water Conservation District, and Clinton and Greene County. And then we have other stakeholders, working together in this watershed. And one of the things that we are doing through this collaborative is we have ran a model which is gaining popularity at the state level and national level. It's called the Agricultural Conservation Practices Model. And what it does is it takes some information, secondary information like LiDAR data or terrain data. We use that terrain information to identify terrain information and other readily available sources such as SURGO, Soil Survey Geographic Database, and the information in SURGO, to come up with locations where we can implement these conservation practices. When I say conservation practices, there are certain conservation practices that ACPF model outputs. One of them is grass waterway. The map that you're seeing here on your right is the identified locations of grass waterways. So what it does is it will tell us, like, is this location suitable for a grass waterway? Or some other practices include like bioreactors. Denitrifying bioreactors at the edge of a farmer's field is something that we could use to remove nitrates before it enters into surface water. So what happens is it's essentially a pit with wood chips in there, and under saturated conditions, the bacteria present actually denitrifies, and it removes or reduces nitrates present in the water that is leaving the field, and it is converted to nitrogen gas, and that we're preventing nitrates entering into our streams. So that's another practice. There are several others, contour buffer strips and other practices. So this model is going to provide us locations of these practices within watershed. My next step is actually we ran these models for 5 HUC-12s in the Cesar Creek area. My next step is to actually run these models, run these models for the 5 HUC-12s in the Tecumseh Land Trust area. We're still working on getting the data set for that area ready. Once we finalize, have the data set, we should be able to provide these maps where these conservation practices can be targeted. So I think this would give us some help as to where these practices can go in the landscape, in the watershed. So I'm really excited about this partnership, Caesar Creek partnership, and we're working with them. Like Cheryl mentioned, I think this the watershed scale partnership actually can transpire into something bigger if we start tapping into other resources that are available through other agencies, like RCPP is AFA is a good source to do that. So we're trying to expand this work, and my goal is to create a similar work in the Tecumseh Land Trust area and identify practices, and work with Megan and other folks in the region to improve conservation in our watersheds. So with that, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, Lauren, and my contact is here. If you want to really talk about the conservation practices that I just shared and how Central State can help you, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is provided there. My phone number is there. I would be happy to talk with you more on what we're doing. Thank you, Lauren, and everyone.
Thank you so much. You have so many projects going on. It's really, really interesting. I see Jim in the chat has some very specific questions. What software are you using to process and tile, mosaic, the drone images? Is anyone mapping the geologic and vegetation features or any other features in the images? Are drones georeferenced? Are drone images georeferenced?
So right now, drone-based sensing, we are just starting. I'm planning to get that done this summer. So I have to work with the producers and talk with them to see how feasible that is. And yes, when we collect drone-based imageries, it will be georeferenced. This will help us, overlay the drone images onto other resources that we have, for example, Surgo data, to pull out information from Soil Survey Geographic Database to see what the variability is within the field. One of the key interests that I have is look at the in-field variability and how that impacts, let's say, nutrient management, within the field. How variable that is, which fields are suitable for VNMP, let's say, so those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer through research. But of course, this would also benefit the producers, in understanding the variability that they have in their field. And that can also assist them with nutrient application if they choose to, if they end up choosing VRT, variable rate technology, the images that we're collecting would be useful as input layers in that work, in VRT work.
Great. And Dr. Shakti, I do have a question. So if a landowner in our target area is, about to get a conservation practice implemented using the cost share assistance through EQIP, what does the soil sampling, what does that entail? Is it does it take a long time? What could a landowner expect from that process?
Yeah, so we did all the soil sampling ourselves, right? My postdoc was out there collecting soil samples, and we did grid soil sampling. We did it at a 2.5 acre grid. That's the grid sampling intensity that we were following. So I have like a gator mounted with an automated sampler as well, so that it makes our job a lot easier. If I take my gator out and collect grid soil sampling along these fields, it's a lot easier. So the producer, they don't have to be involved there. We're not asking them to do grid soil sampling. So we're doing that. But it's like an understanding between Central State and the producer that, we're collecting the data, we'll provide them the data, results of the data, and then we work with them, to address, identify the conservation practices that can go in the field, and what benefits are they seeing, if they're seeing, benefits from conservation practices. I think this information is really critical, and NRCS and other agencies, and Cheryl, you can attest to this fact. We have been collecting data for a long time, but I think, we have to start utilizing the information that we're generating to make decisions. That's something that we have to quickly move toward. So I think the work that we're doing, and that can happen when we establish these local partnerships. We work closely with the producers in the region, and make them, we will be co-partners in this work, So like I said, it's not just about, I see this project as something beyond just environmental quality. When I work with producers, I tell them that, hey, it's not just about environmental quality, but it's about sustainable production as well, improving the productivity. And like nitrogen that is leaving the field, if we can implement these conservation practices, actually, it's going to reduce the amount of nitrogen that we have to be applying to the field the subsequent years. So so that's our goal at Central State, to work with the producers in the region. So
on the soil sampling, will you go back every year to take samples, or how often do you retest?
That's a great question. I think for soil organic matter, let's say, you won't be, for cover crops, as a conservation practice, it might take some time to actually realize organic matter benefits in the soil. So we don't have to do that frequently. But if you are looking at, let's say, a VNMP or variable rate technology for phosphorus, we might do it more frequently. So it really is going to depend on what we're trying to do there in the field. So is it like, are we looking at organic matter sequestration or carbon sequestration? Then we do it less frequently. But if it is like phosphorus, then we would do more frequently.
Great. And there's a question here in the chat about the land grant status of Central State University and what does that mean exactly? And I guess with your role too, and kind of how you fit in with that.
Sure. I wanted to explain that, but I forgot. But Central State University is one of the 1890 land grant institutions in the country, HBCUs, right? HBCUs, not all HBCUs have the land grant status, but 19 of them do. And Central State was added to that list in 2014. So what it means is land grant status is essentially, that land grant status, when Central State received land grant status in 2014, it opened up funding opportunities, from USD and NIFA to carry out agricultural related work, research work, and extension and teaching work. So, for example, Ohio State is an 1862 institution, and they have been receiving funds for quite some time to carry out agricultural mission, agricultural work, research, extension, and teaching. But Central State, was made part of that 1890 land grant. 1890 institutions are the ones that were instituted after Second Morrill Act in 1890. 1862 was the first Morrill Act. Land grants. I don't know how much I know. I don't want to go into the details, but Central State is one of the 19 1890 land grants in the country, and one of the very few in northern part of the country. You can see 1890 institutions that are land grant, mostly spread out in the south, but very few in the north. Lincoln University is another one in Missouri that's a land grant. So the importance of land grant status is that we work with the producers in the region. We work for the community stakeholders in the area of agriculture and agricultural research, extension, and teaching.
Great. So that kind of can fund your research because of that land grant status of Central State?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's I think the big push. Actually, that's the reason why I really want to be. We want Central State to play a key role in the community, in the area of agriculture. And of course, another big mission of 1890 land grant is teach and train historically or underrepresented students, minority students, and majority of our students are minorities at Central State University. So we're engaging them in agriculture, diversifying agricultural workforce. So that's a big mission of USDA. That's another thing, that is why we are actively, partnering with agencies and stakeholders in the region.
Yeah, it's been interesting to me to just learn about how many resources there are for landowners and farmers in the area, and through Central State and through NRCS. It's really been eye-opening for me in the past year and a half or so. And I do want to say Megan Mosier and Cheryl Rice are back with us and are here to answer questions as well. I will say back to Dr. Shakti, there's a question here, are your test results and future drone images open source?
No,
And
that's a great question, Jim. I think, it's between the producer and Central State University. We won't be sharing that, it won't be an open source data, for the public. We respect the privacy of that data. So even if we share the data, we would be, let's say if I'm working with multiple producers in the region, I would summarize the data for the region, and if it's going to add to the information that, or I should say, if it's going to provide some benefit, if I summarize the data and provide it to the community, that's when we will do it. But the data won't be shared to the public directly.
okay, great. I do have a question about your presentation too. I thought that slide you showed was really interesting of the different conservation practices that have been most implemented through NRCS in the past 20 years or so. And you mentioned you thought that change could be happening because of Ohio, the funds up north due to Lake Erie in recent years. So I'm kind of curious on everyone's thoughts on that and why those changes are happening, and is that due to the research that's been done that the practices are changing and what's most recommended and implemented?
Yeah, that's a great question for sure. I was thinking about that as well, when I pulled out that plot. And I guess I think that's let me ask you this question, Cheryl, is that something accurate? The data that I've plotted, is that the trend, general trend that we're seeing, that cover crop, the funding for cover crop or the acreage under cover crop has gone up over the years?
Yeah, and it's actually a really good point, Lauren, because there's, and when you look at those numbers, there's so many things at play that kind of drive it. And Megan knows about some of them sort of at the granular level, the individual landowner's decision making. Cover crops has just gained a lot of interest. So there is sort of what I call an industry-wide momentum that's going up. And so NRCS in some ways responds, right, with making sure we've got program dollars available for that, not only across the state, but like you mentioned, specifically additional dollars invested up in Northwest Ohio, because cover crops can play a role in retaining phosphorus and keeping it in the field so it's not leaching out and getting losses in the fall or early spring. During thaws, even in the winter, really. So there's a piece of that goes in there. So there's the interest in what's going on in groups like what nonprofits are doing and what technology and what land-grant universities are researching and sharing with folks, because there's been plenty of research to show that some cover crops actually release more phosphorus, right? So we know some of them do just the opposite. So it's not like cover crops are just the answer, right? It's doing them a certain way and doing them at the right time in the right place and things like that. And so that's part of what's going on. So what's going on in the research, what's going on in the industry, sort of the word of mouth, what happens at the coffee shop, what a farmer, you mentioned earlier, Lauren, when somebody tried something and it didn't go well. Well, that gets shared between their peer group and what happens following that. And if they had a fabulous experience, what follows happening that. And then the other thing that also happens that's a little harder to discern unless you're in Megan and I's shoes is some of the changes actually in program rules and program funding. So sometimes the numbers go down, not because we have a lack of interest, it's because Congress has allocated us less money to invest in those things. So some things have actually gone down, or programs have gone down because they have weighted one program over another in federal funding. So some of the shifts happen for what I would call purely political reasons, right? Purely what they prefer to see or what their constituents have told them they're interested and think it's making a difference at the local level. So there's some of that that's happening as well. And then there's some of it is just tweaks in our rules to make some practices work better. So you saw a nice dip right in the middle where there wasn't as much nutrient management planning going on. And that's not that there wasn't a lot of nutrient management planning going on in the watershed, it's just that we weren't paying for it. And in part, that was because our standard was very challenging. It got written very technically, and it was, I don't know the good word for muddled. Okay, we'll just put it that way. It wasn't done in a way that was intended to make it more difficult, but it ended up making it much more difficult to implement. So we saw sort of a drop off of people wanting to engage and try it out based on the way we created our standard. And so we made changes and revisions to make it more dynamic and reflect more of what a landowner would want to do. So some of those changes were actually because we changed the approach that we were taking on those specific practices. So there's a lot going on there. What you do see in general, which I'm excited to see, is you can see as you go across that graph, you don't see a lack of interest or engagement in landowners. You see an increasing interest and curiosity in trying out practices, willing to participate in programs. So even if the slope isn't the way some people would love it to be, you're seeing this continued interest and engagement. And I think that's probably the most telling piece, that one, as a nation, we're willing to continue to invest this way, but two, we're getting response from landowners that agree that these are investments that are worth making into their operations and have a legacy that move forward to a more sustainable approach. So both those things are what I see out of it, at least in part. But yeah, there's a lot that goes on to those lines bumping up and down. So you see one program kind of disappeared and you saw another one started, and that was where Congress got rid of one and replaced it with sort of a different version of that too. So some of those things happen as well. So there's a little bit of that goes on, that happens in DC that affects us here locally. So.
But it's safe to assume that cover crops right now is a hot topic. From the plot, you can see, even though, I think Cheryl made a good point there. It's not, cover crops are not going to work all across, everywhere in the landscape for multiple reasons. Emergence could be bad if the hydrologic, the hydrologic condition is not suitable for cover crops. Then we're not going to see the benefits of cover crops in the field. So those are the kinds of questions that we want to answer. And I think I just saw this question that Krista just posted in the chat box, and she's asking about demonstration farm, cover crop demonstration farms in the state. We have the Blanchard River demonstration. I don't know, Cheryl, I think they have a couple of sites that have cover crops in them. That's something that we can visit or see. But ultimately, I think, I was talking to Molly, Warren County Water Conservation District the other day, and we're thinking about applying. Cheryl, you're here thinking about applying for an RCPP AFA for that Cesar Creek Collaborative. And one of the things we wanted to do through that work is create a similar demonstration farm network in southwestern Ohio for all these practices, specifically focusing on nutrient management and cover crops. As they're the top two ones, I think, we have to look into. So we will have those demo farms within our region, so that way we involve the producers in our region, participate, they play an active role in, they're communicating the importance of all the conservation practices that we're trying to promote in the region. So.
Great. Okay, you mentioned the Blanchard watershed. Okay, we'll have to.
Yeah, it's called the Blanchard River Demonstration Network.
Yeah, okay. And that's a collaboration between Ohio Farm Bureau and NRCS. It's got, like you said, multiple locations. We have a place that has an operator that has hogs, livestock. So it sort of demonstrates hog manure and hog operations and how that works with their waste streams and managing the crops to feed them. Plus a couple folks that just do row crop production. And I say just, meaning, it's a sidebar. So they aren't doing livestock, they're doing corn, beans, and wheat rotation. And there's a few spots to go take a look as well. So yeah, those are some great opportunities to go take a look hands-on and what it looks like at a field scale to implement these practices. And they do have that sampler that Sakthi showed at, I believe, 3 out of 3 of those locations. They'll have those. So if you did want to see what those really cool samplers look like as flow is coming across the field and that water's getting collected. It's actually a great tool, and it's really a cool technology to see in operation.
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, yeah. So if the producers are interested, Lauren, in our partnership, if they want to look at the edge of field monitoring in action, they are welcome to visit the Montgomery site that we have. And then also I have a setup in the lab as well to actually demo how this is done. Cheryl, like I think you brought that up, that equipment, one of the things that we're trying to do is, we're trying to find alternate ways to monitor salt water and collect salt water coming off the edge of farmers' fields. The equipment costs around like $35,000 per site. And if you're doing a paired comparison, let's say you have two sites, we have one site should acts as a control, the other one acts as a treatment site, which is cover crops or whatever, conservation practices that we're looking at. Each site would cost us around $35,000. So it's about $70,000 per field. So we're trying to find alternate methods to do the same thing. In fact, I don't know, Megan, were you part of that discussion with the CCC? We met someone from Wisconsin, and they have a device that costs around like $6,000 and does the same thing that we're doing with the 35K instrument. So we're exploring all those options in our area, in our watersheds.
Okay, I'm just seeing here in the chat, does hay for cash sale count as a cover crop? And Cheryl, it looks like you did respond to that. I don't know if you want to say more about that. You said that cover crop, it wouldn't count as a cover crop, but it would count as a complex crop rotation. So could the complex crop rotation be counted as a equip practice?
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up, so if you're going to put in a cover crop, for it to actually be a cover crop, you can't harvest it for sale, because it's going to be there for the purposes of what you're doing, either for the soil benefit, nutrient capture, what have you. But oftentimes, if someone wants to add hay in part of a rotation that does not currently have it, and you want to add hay in rotation, that would be a more involved crop rotation, and that would be available. And Megan can give you more details on that.
Great. And I'm looking back up in the chat, and perhaps this is a question for Cheryl, but the question is, what will funds for Black farmers in the COVID relief bill do?
I have not read that yet, so I am not certain. They had a couple different objectives with that. Megan, have you read that yet to know what that's coming up? We haven't received anything internally yet to have something, cogent to share. But once we do, we can share that with the group. It's still quite new, so sorry, I don't have anything detailed yet to share.
Okay. And great, that's great, because I know that came up in our last Saturday Growing Green, and it seems like really, really interesting project, and it'll be interesting to see how it ends up rolling out. And so there's a question in the chat here. Are you seeing people add more small grains to their crop rotation?
Megan, do you have more people coming in for that? I think it's regional. We have some, it depends on the number of livestock and the logistics. There's a market-based piece there. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm mostly just seeing corn and soybeans right now. And again, it's totally market dependent.
Yeah. So Krista, one of the things that plays into that is the location of where the animals are in relation to where that crop is grown. And that has a lot to do with the external expenses for fuel and logistics. So it's not always that someone might not want to do it. In fact, we have a lot of producers that used to do it not too very long ago, but the market is gone. And that logistics train, that sort of that piece that connects their farm field to that receiving end of the material is no longer in place or isn't economically feasible. And that's really where we're seeing the biggest barrier. And that there's some other approaches to way they're doing some more livestock operations. So they're changing up how they feed animals and that changes what people grow then too. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we had a barley, somebody who buys barley for a malting operation in Marysville present, which was quite interesting. I do have a question, Cheryl. I know I did see you responded to this question in the chat, and I did want to clarify with this because you've all touched on it a little bit, but we do get a lot of questions about there's also, so we kind of covered EQIP as a NRCS program, cost share program, but then there's also CRP and CSP. And I think that these acronyms can be a little bit confusing. And so I was wondering if you guys could kind of clarify those programs and what folks should know about those two programs that NRCS also has.
Yeah, it's like an alphabet soup, right? We throw it out there like everybody knows what we're talking about too. We're kind of crazy that way. We throw letters out in acronyms like everybody does what we do all day. So the one that's more commonly people are aware of, especially in land preservation work, like your crowd probably, is CRP. And that's the Conservation Reserve Program. And FSA actually heads that up, that money, Congress gives that money to them. And they rely on us for the technical piece. So they still talk to us and work with us on that, but they kind of administer it, so if that makes sense. The cool thing about CRP is that it's really about setting aside property, setting aside land. Generally, you need to think about it as the more vulnerable pieces that maybe are not great for production anyway. That's the target of CRP. So riparian corridors, those low corners that you always have low productivity and flooding out, pastures that just have some big challenges. Maybe they have a very shallow soil profile, lots of different reasons, right? But CRP really sets aside that ground. Let's put some sort of permanent cover on it. That might be shrubs, it might be trees, it might be grass and natives, and it really sets it aside and allows that person to still have an agronomic status, like the land use status still stays ag land, but that property is set aside for conservation instead, because that ground is more vulnerable, and it's really, in many ways in an operation, it's probably a better fit than what we're doing as far as production. And so, and then in doing that, then that program, they get some dollars to install that vegetation, and then they get an annual payment to sort of make up for the losses that would have come if they had rented the ground out to someone else to farm it. So that's what CRP does. And CRP is really a landowner program. So if you're renting that ground, you're not eligible for CRP, but you are if you own it. So if you think about it, if you're a landowner and you've got this piece that the producer is complaining about, that they want a tile and it's a mess and it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, and there's no affordable solution to those things, a lot of times CRP makes sense, especially riparian corridors where you're still trying to figure out, who's going to succeed on this property, who wants this land after I'm done farming. 15 years is the window. So sometimes that's just the right amount of time. So your family has some time to set that land aside, let it sort of rebound from that stress, and then decide what you're going to do, whether it's going to go back into production or if you're going to keep it in permanent cover and have it no longer be, considered really ag land. So I like CRP for that option. It's really not meant to take the best and the greatest and take it out of production. I know it gets a lot of bad press for that, but it's really meant to take these vulnerable, low production areas and do something smarter with them, and then still, mitigate that fiscal risk that the landowner would be taking in doing that. So CSP is going to smell and taste a little bit like EQIP in the sense that we're doing practices that are problem solving. But CSP is generally for our more advanced producers, people that have already done quite a few practices and are looking at sort of amping up to be, and I call the difference between maybe being a B+ student and wanting to be an A+ student as an ecological farmer. A lot of them come in and they want to do something newest, latest, greatest. And CSP is sort of designed to do that, to take someone who's a good producer and make them sort of the A+ student. And the program requires that your whole operation go in. So we, people like Megan, pull in all that land and they evaluate all your different fields. And it's a competitive program. So you rank against other people who are looking to do that. And we ask you, what do you want to do in addition? Meaning you're doing a great job, but could you do a little bit of something for wildlife or pollinators? Maybe put a pollinator strip in. Are you doing really good on your ag ground, but you have this 2 or 3 sets of woods that maybe you can do some extra forestry practices in? And they want you to do a little bit more. And they're going to ask you to do that over a 5 to 10 year period. So it's a longer contract than EQIP, and we're asking a little bit more of folks. And again, the difference between that and EQIP is EQIP, you can fix one piece, one field and try it out. CSP, we're asking you to do things pretty much operation wide. So it's somebody who's really willing to take on quite a bit, or has already taken on quite a bit and wants to do a little bit more. So that's sort of the difference between those two and what we've talked about a little bit with EQIP. Does that help? I know people ask, and that's just the brief, elevator clip.
Yeah, Megan, I wonder if when you talk with people, are you introducing people to these programs often for the first time, or is the word
definitely
out pretty much? Okay.
Well, the word is getting out. I think a lot of people are much more familiar with the EQIP, and I'm not sure why CSP really hasn't taken off that I've seen yet. But every time I'm meeting with new producers, I definitely throw out the idea of EQIP first, and then once they're done with their EQIP and they're addressing some sort of level of conservation, then we could introduce them to either more EQIP or CSP down the road. But it's kind of CSP, I think of as next level conservation. It's like, okay, you're already doing something, and like Cheryl said, what can we enhance that's already there?
Great, thanks.
Sure, and Megan, maybe you can also talk about CTA. That's another big pool, that people can tap into.
Right. So if someone doesn't necessarily want to come to the government or NRCS for funding and to go through all the paperwork, we do offer just conservation technical assistance. And that's where I would come out like normal, visit with you on your property. If, for instance, there's gully erosion in a crop field and it needs a grassed waterway, but you don't necessarily want to have that waterway be cost shared and go through the ranking process, but you just want designs on that waterway, then we can definitely provide those. Or if you want us to look at your entire operation, like what CSP would, and just develop a holistic conservation plan, we could give you that document with recommendations. Then you can follow all of them or some of them and at your own schedule.
That's great, thank you. We have time for just maybe a question or two more. Cheryl, thank you for those resources. I'm seeing a question here, is CTA free? Or the conservation technique?
It'll just cost you a high five.
Well, that's great. And Dr. Shakti, I do have a question for you. Just kind of what are you seeing in your monitoring so far of these conservation practices? And if how long have you been collecting data, and are you seeing anything yet? Or
this is my second year, right? The edge of field site that I have in Montgomery County, I'm not seeing a lot of phosphorus, but I'm seeing a lot of nitrogen coming off the field. We haven't adjusted we haven't completely implemented the paired work study there yet. We have a controlled drainage structure. One of the things that we wanted to do is to control the drainage in one part of the field and not do that in the other, and then look at the differences. We haven't started looking at that. We have been collecting water samples from both fields simultaneously, but general trend that I'm seeing there is that we're seeing a lot more nitrates and phosphorus. And the same thing is true for the Little Miami monitoring that we're doing. And there's considerable variability in terms of nitrogen nitrates that we're seeing in the InStream monitoring there throughout the season, actually off season as well. So one of the work that we're doing right now is I'm taking some remotely sensed imagery from satellite to predict dissolved oxygen in the streams in Little Miami. So that's a work that we're trying to do. We are running the models to see if we can predict dissolved oxygen. If we can do that with remotely sensed imageries, then we can predict DO and the quality of water at a temporal scale, frequent temporal scales, which might give us information about what's happening temporally in the watershed, in the landscape. So that's what I'm seeing at the edge of field site. With soil health, we just finished running all the pH. You know, we had to pre-process all the samples. I had 1,000 samples. We ran all the samples for pH, and I'm trying to get carbon data on all of those samples. So it's still in process.
Great, thanks. We'll be on, listening to what you see in the future. And there's one more question here. So how do you get started with CRP? Because it was mentioned that CRP is a program of the Farm Service Agency, or FSA. So how does that program work with you all from NRCS?
Well, the good thing is, because we all work for USDA, we're all sitting pretty close to one another. So Megan probably sits not less than 30 feet away from the Farm Service folks. So the best thing you can do is, just like you would come in for EQIP, come in and talk to Megan and tell them you're interested in CRP. She'll walk you over most likely, although these days it might be a phone call more than a walkover. But normally we like, I've done this a million times. You're in the office, someone comes in, you walk them over to Farm Service Agency. And you introduce them to their conservation technician, who gets you started in the CRP program. And it'll be the same sort of paperwork kind of starting process. You kind of get your name in there. They identify the fields you're looking at, and you as a producer, you as a landowner. And then they'll start putting a plan together. So as soon as they put in that application, a lot of that information comes right back over to Megan. And then she starts working on some planning work to get everything sort of in a mapping system and in place. So all that technical information on what you're going to plant gets back to you. And then Farm Service just is the one that you're going to have the bulk of the conversations with about how the program is going to move forward for them, and what the dollars end up looking like, and what sort of those requirements are. Those will all come from Farm Services Agency. And then once the technical stuff for being out in the field, you'll talk to someone like Megan.
Well, great, thank you. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we are right about at 3 o'clock. So I just want to say thanks so much to our presenters for all the information. And I'll say Megan's available. She's in Xenia and in her office in Xenia. It's a pleasure to work with. Thanks everyone for presenting, and we look forward to hearing from all of you in the future about your work.